A lot of young people think like, oh, well, to be fearless, that means that like nothing scary is gonna happen, right? Like we're gonna be fearless and it's just gonna be okay and that's how we're supposed to live. But that's like not the promise, and that's not true. It doesn't mean that God's promising that nothing's gonna be scary. It's that when those things happen, when that situation comes up, that we have the ability and the authority in Christ Jesus that we get to be still and just know that He's God and that He's got it.
You are an author. We're going to talk about that tonight. You have a tour. You are a public speaker. You are a motivational speaker. You are an actress. You came from reality television. I think most of us remember those days. You kind of grew up on our televisions in some ways. But you've accomplished so much, Sadie, for being such a young person, actually. But yet you've overcome so much in life. And I think a lot of people would look at you like often happens in life and say, man, she has got it all together, this girl. But you've actually overcome quite a bit to be sitting on this stage with me tonight.
Yeah, well, that's actually I'm glad you said that, because I feel like some people think that like you're going to get to this point in life or this place, or I don't know, a certain job may exclude you from having the problems that everybody deals with. And that's just not true. And I think that's a trick of the enemy, because he puts this like destination inside. It's like, oh, if you could just get there, then you would, be free from this. Then you wouldn't fear, then you wouldn't be insecure, then you wouldn't have problems. And then you get there and you're like, wait, why do I still have problems? Why am I so afraid? Why am I so insecure? Because truly nobody's excluded from the ways of this world. We're all in it. But obviously, our hope is in Jesus, and that's what makes the biggest difference. And I think for me, it was kind of that way. It's like being in this, it wasn't that any fear was gone. It wasn't any insecurity was gone. It almost felt like that doubled and then tripled and then got worse because of that idea that you're actually going to get somewhere to free it, instead of just recognizing that Jesus is actually going to meet you where you're at and free you in the middle of it. And I think for me, it's ironic because the time of Dancing with the Stars, honestly, we're getting real fast. That was like the hardest, that was probably the lowest part of my journey, especially with fear. I remember, and I really don't share this in detail that much, but to be completely honest, the night that they called me to be on the show, you would think you'd be like, woo, I'm going to Dance with the Stars. That is not what I looked like. I was like freaking out, not just like minor freak out, like major freak out. Like I remember I was driving in my car and I was going to Mary Kate, who was my sister-in-law now. She was my friend at the time. She was dating John Luke. She's still my friend, but we were just friends. And she had just started dating my brother. It was all weird. And I was like on my way to her house because I needed like my friends at this point. I was freaking out and I started driving. Just start shaking, like just total fear, like invasion, start crying. I literally got to the point where I like threw up, which is disgusting. But that is like what fear can you can get to that point of fear where it's so real. It is like all over you and it literally just makes you just freak out. And I remember I got there and I was so embarrassed that I had been like at this place of so afraid that I was like, I'm not going in that house. I'm just going to like circle it, U-turn, go back home. And I remember when I was in the driveway, I quickly got out and I was going to go back home. And my brother, John Luke, comes running out of the house because he had been waiting outside on the porch for me, just recognizing that I wasn't there yet. And he came and he starts knocking on my window and I'm like, nope, you're not getting in this car. Like, I'm not about to show you what I look like right now. And I was just so embarrassed. And he jumped on the top of my car. No joke. What a brother, right? He jumps on the top of my car and I just started driving around with him on the top of my car. I thought, I'm not opening this door. So for 30 minutes, not being dramatic at all, 30 minutes, I drive around the neighborhood with him at the top of my car. Every now and then I'll just hear a little knock. You gonna let me in? Nope. I keep driving. And eventually, of course, I get out of the car and he just sat with me and he just heard me out for like hours, and we talked and we prayed and we just talked about what this is going to look like. And I think that was such a great picture, a horrible picture, but a great picture of what fear can get you to the point of, where you're totally not yourself. You're totally freaking out, even when it's an amazing opportunity, an amazing moment that God's literally placed in front of you. But the enemy somehow sneaked in and like whispered these things of lies and why you should be afraid or why you shouldn't do it. Then you get afraid and then you're embarrassed that you're afraid. So then you hide and you like make sure nobody in your life can actually see what you're going through. And the minute I opened that car door and talked to him, it was like things began to really shift because he could see truth, because fear will blind you into this weird spot. And he just began to like shine a light on truth. And at that time, my mom called me and she said like the most crucial thing. She was talking about one of her friends who had called her and said, just in case any of y'all are dealing with fear, which don't you love how the Holy Spirit works? He's like, let me just fix this. He's like, just in case any of y'all are dealing with fear, I just want you to know you have nothing to be afraid of. Actually, they should be the ones afraid because of who God is inside of her that's going to go to Hollywood and do this thing. And it totally just flipped everything for me in that moment. Of course, didn't like automatically magically happen. It was a process, and it was like continuing to like break through. For me, it wasn't one night, poof, I'm like good. It was literally this journey of walking out with God, and time after time after time, every Monday night that show happened. It was just that confident trust of seeing God. Okay, you did it here, you're going to do it again. You did it here, you're going to do it again. And then recognizing and realizing that the place fear is, there fear is conquered. And so time and time again of being in that place like David and Goliath, and then seeing that giant fall, you're like, I can do it again because my God was faithful then. He'll continue to be faithful. And that's the main thing that's going to break fear. To me, it has to be faith. And I've had conversation with people all the time at my age. They're like, yeah, but what if you don't believe in God? And I'm like, well, honestly, I don't know how to speak to that, because for me, for 3 years, I tried every coping mechanism you can do, but not until I just chose faith did my fear leave. And
it's so amazing that the Bible, they've said this, but unless you're in that place, it doesn't mean as much. But 365 times in the Bible, it says, fear not. God knew that we were going to fear. So for us to fear, it's not abnormal. It seems like it's normal for a human being to be afraid. God knew that about us. And so he's encouraging us time after time after time to fear not. And that's what we're talking about on this program tonight. We're talking about what some say 50 million people in America are struggling with, and that's anxiety. And anxiety has its cousins: depression, fear, worry, doubt, dread. There's a whole army or a host of friends that come along with fear. But the root of it, I think, is our confidence and our trust in who God is. And so you said it's a process, and I'm glad you said that, because some of you watching tonight, you already know there's not a simple answer. There's not a one-size-fits-all Band-Aid for all depression, all anxiety. It's all different, and it comes in different forms at different times, but it's a process. And it was for me in my life, struggling with anxiety. It's a process for you. Talk about the process that you went through.
The process. Well, for me, really what shifted and what helped me so much in the process is when I read Psalms 46. And if you haven't read that in a while, I encourage you to go back and read it. Because when I read that, I realized something. Sometimes we think, I think maybe this is a 20-year-old thinking, but a lot of young people think like, oh, well, to be fearless, that means that like nothing scary is going to happen, right? Like we're going to be fearless and it's just going to be okay, and that's how we're supposed to live. But that's like not the promise, and that's not true. It doesn't mean that God's promising that nothing's going to be scary. It's that when those things happen, when that situation comes up, that we have the ability and the authority in Christ Jesus, that we get to be still and just know that he's God and that he's got it. Amazing. And in Psalms 46, it talks about even when the oceans roar and foam, even when the mountains crumble into the heart of the sea, even when the nations are in chaos and in uproar. So this is stuff that we all see happen all the time. And this is the very things that make us afraid. In this Psalms 46, it talks about in those moments, you have to believe that there is a river who makes glad the sacred place of the Most High. He dwells in that place and it cannot be destroyed. It goes on and just talks about who God is in those moments. And then it says, and all you have to do is be still and know that he is God. Wow. And so that changed for me in the process, because it wasn't that I was like, oh, nothing bad's going to happen. It was like I was prepared, that even when I see that happen, I'm like, actually, I'm going to be still and know that you're God, and I'm just going to let you do this. And when you see him fight for you time and time again, that's what strengthens your confident trust in him. And in Psalms 91, that obviously is one that many people read over themselves. And I heard my grandma read that over me a lot, heard my mom speak that over me a lot, but I was just actually reading it back there because I read it most times before I speak. And I loved what it said. It was talking about how like, it goes through like how God is our refuge and our strength, but then it goes through, if you believe that he is your refuge, then you need to know
Yeah.
that he sends angels to encamp themselves around you, that no harm will come to your tent. And I love that because it's like, if you're believing that he's your refuge, then you also need to believe that this is what he's doing in that. That's what that means to be your refuge. So in the process, just continuing to speak those psalms, speak the hymns that you've heard all your life, speak the truth of the word. And in Ephesians, Paul actually talks about speaking to each other in psalms, hymns, and praises. Yeah. And I used to be like, that would be kind of awkward if I was sitting here to you and I was just like, but no, it's actually like exactly what has helped me. Like, actually, whenever you see a fear, I'm like, I'm just going to start speaking psalms. I'm just going to start memorizing them so I can speak it. And it's so cool because time and time again, this may sound crazy, I'll feel like fear coming because you can feel it. It's a presence. And I'll just start like declaring things. I'll start Psalms 91, Psalms 46, and all of a sudden it's like peace just invades the room. And I'm like, boom. God is my refuge and my strength.
It's so great. You know, we talk about worship being a weapon. Yeah. And even you referenced the story of David and Goliath, the story that everyone knows, everyone watching knows the story of David and Goliath, but it wasn't the rock and the sling ultimately, because that's not what David said. He said, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. But he didn't say, I'm coming with my shepherd's rod and I got 5 rocks and I'm a good aim and I've killed a bunch of stuff in the past. He said, I come against you in the name of the Lord God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And he knew right there that worship was the weapon that he was going to use to defeat that giant and to see God come through again like he had in the past. If I can ask you maybe a more personal question, you talk about in the book's called Live Fearless, and a call to purpose, to power, passion, and purpose. And you talked in this book about being on Dancing with the Stars and it being a super low point for you. Mm-hmm. And you talked about beginning to struggle with actually an eating disorder, and there was a big set of challenges before you in your life. That's real. And I think people would look at you and they would say, Sadie Robertson doesn't struggle with anything. Look at her. She's successful and amazing. And your life changed overnight when you were on Dancing with the Stars. You became a celebrity overnight. People know you everywhere now that you go because of that. But here you were in the pit, like face up against a real enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, what I realized, and this is the danger of fear. There's a lot of dangers of fear, but one of them is that it's a snowball effect. It doesn't stop there. Like, I think when I became afraid, that also tagged on to being insecure because it takes your confidence and then you're not secure anymore in who you are and you're afraid of what people think about you. So then you try to like polish yourself to be this image that you think that they want to see, but that's really not who you are. Then you feel like a hypocrite. Who am I? And it just is a snowball. And I mean, that was my walk personally for you. I'm sure you can look back and tell your story, but I remember actually what flipped that for me was an Uber driver randomly. I was in an Uber in San Francisco and this man was so down and he was so upset and he looked at me and he said, I wish I could be like you, but I can't. I wish I could be happy like you, but I can't. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm the emptiest person that you'll ever meet. And I was like, whoa. And I just kind of asked him where that was coming from. And he said, well, I always thought if I had this much amount of money, then I would be happy. And then I would go back home and I'd be with my family. But I moved out here to San Francisco. Now I'm driving Uber, but I have the most money I've ever thought I would have, but I'm emptier than I've ever been. And I looked at him and I said, I can't even tell you how much I can relate to you right now. Because I thought if I got to this point in my life, then that would be it. Like, I always prayed that I would have this opportunity to speak to people about Jesus. I prayed that I would have this whatever. I would be secure in who I am. I'd be confident. And now I have every opportunity to have that, but yet I'm more fearful than I've ever been. I'm more insecure than I've ever been. And we looked at each other, and in that moment, I was like, I think we've been going after the wrong thing. Wow. And it was kind of that moment for me that it began to shift, because I realized it does not matter if you're driving an Uber, if you're on Dancing with the Stars, you can struggle with the exact same thing. You can be physically worlds apart, but spiritually in the same place. And the answer is the same for both of you. And that was a huge, huge turning point.